Anyway, and that's Billy, welcome to Planet Waves TV and Planet Waves FM.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we'll maybe learn more about your career as we move along here. But I want to just start by saying that I found the video of you're explaining that digital versus analog is not about the sound. You
Yeah.
remember this one, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I thought, okay, finally somebody's got a fucking clue.
Yeah. It's one of these things. I made the video because I actually got tired of the whole sound argument. And definitely there's some differences in the sound and some things I like about analog and some things I like about digital. But to me, it was more about the workflow,
Yeah.
how it changed the way that we work on music, but also how we think about what we're doing. So, and just for people who haven't seen the video, one of the main things that I talk about is that when you were working on analog, when you would do something called, for instance, punching is where, let's say you sang something and there were three words that you wanted to replace and redo them. When you did it on analog, when you got to that point, the engineer hit record and you would record those words over again, but it would erase what was there before.
Yeah.
Whereas in digital, if you do that and you don't like what you did, you can always hit undo, which is actually a great thing, which I use all the time. But the problem is that it means that people kind of come in, I think, less prepared, meaning when you know that you're going to erase something and the choice of doing it, like you're going to be more likely to come into the studio prepared and really be up to snuff as opposed to like, yeah, let's just do 20 takes and you pick the best one. And that's another thing about digital where because you have unlimited tracks, people can just come in the studio and do 50 takes of a vocal, right? And then the engineer's got to go through and kind of piece it together from all the takes. Whereas analog, you could still kind of do that, but you wouldn't have as many tracks to, lay your vocals out. And when you piece them together, you would typically record them to another track, which would add noise, which would mean that you're less likely to do those things. So once again, when you kind of came into the studio, you just had to be a little bit more prepared. And it ended up becoming more about a performance, making sure that you got a great performance. Whereas when you're working in digital, the focus tends to, because of the way we work now, tends to be focused more on perfection. And perfection, technically speaking, is not the same thing as performance or vibe.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main things that I talk about.
Yep. So just to sum up, essentially the message of your we will link to this video. It's so good, and I talk about the digital issue pretty much every time I open my mouth. Just so you know, my entire channel, including my astrology columns, I am on the case of the digital issue. I'm a student of the McLuhan family. I knew Marshall's son, Eric. I know the grandson, Andrew. So I've been serious about understanding this. And that's why I really lit up when I saw your video. And the video is saying it's not about the final product. It's about the workflow and the process of creating that process. The medium is the message. It shifts. The technology framework shifts the entire mind frame and mindset and affects every facet of the creativity to getting to the end result. And that's the main difference.
Yes, it is. It's huge. The other thing, and I actually talk about this, I have two videos that kind of touch on the same subject. The other thing for me is that the technology, all the tools that are out there are great, that it allows us to create music with software instruments, to recreate an orchestra or drums or whatever. And that's great for people that don't have the budget to hire drummers and all that sort of thing. And some of the new plugins are actually emulating analog software, and they do a great job of it. Like some of the Neve Mic Pre plugins sound great. But here's the problem. If you're using a Neve Mic Pre model plugin, it's the same plugin that a million other people have. Whereas if you're in a studio and there's 5, 6 vintage Neve modules there, each one of them has a slightly different character because it's an analog piece of gear. It's an electronic piece of gear. These things like slight differences in the circuitry, the resistors and the capacitors and all that kind of stuff it's almost imperceivable to the ear, although sometimes it's not. But added up, when you're going through a bunch of analog gear and you're going across, multiple instruments and multiple microphones and all these different channels through this electronic gear, it ends up being a unique sound. Another band could come in and maybe somebody had the snare drum mic on channel 3 on the board, or they're using this mic pre or whatever. You can never create that sound. So every recording in analog is a unique event. The sound of analog gear will also change depending on a million other factors, like how warm it is and a slight difference in the knob. Also using microphones, a microphone miking an amp as opposed to using a software plugin. If the microphone is slightly an inch further away or to this side, or even the humidity and the temperature in the room can change the sound. There's no way to recreate a sound in analog the next day. Even if you don't move anything, it's going to sound different the next day for a million different reasons. So therefore, every analog recording was an absolute unique experience, whereas in digital, it's not always. And I know there's some of these plugins are sophisticated and they have a lot of options to tweak them out, but A, most people never touch the presets, and B, it's still all coming through basically the same filter. They're all getting their plugins from a website like Splice or something like that. I work with a lot of youngsters and I hear their tracks and they technically sound great, but they all kind of sound the same as each other. It's almost as if I used a snare drum on a song, and then when I was done, somebody came and literally grabbed my snare drum. And it's not exactly the same. It would still sound different, but it's like everybody has the same guitar. Everybody has the same. It's like there's one microphone.
That's sure.
That everybody uses.
Well, okay, so I've been looking at this mic. We'll come back to that. But for example, we're both using RE20s.
Yep.
This is an old broadcast microphone.
Yeah.
And all these new microphones, they all sound the same. This super digital, extra crispy sound. There's like no character. There's no warmth.
Well, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No. But let's stick to the process versus product, because what I think you're suggesting is that the warmth comes through the sense of a performance in the studio under analog conditions. We've got to get this right. My mind always goes to Bob Dylan and Scarlett Rivera and Emmylou Harris in the studio recording Blood on the Tracks, and they're passing around a bottle of wine, and they're sitting in a little circle, and they're making art together from scratch, and they can hear each other and feel each other's presence and smell each other, and they know how they were feeling the day before, and they're doing this thing together. That is not a digital frame of mind.
Exactly. So that's the other thing too, because of the way analog was. Yeah, you could go and you could record all your tracks separately, but back then people tended to record together a lot more.
Yes.
I've done several albums with a bluegrass group called the Infamous String Dusters, and they're all premier, amazing musicians. And we do make those records in digital. We're going into Pro Tools. However, when they play, they're all looking at each other. Even if they're in separate booths, because sometimes I want to get more isolation on the microphones, although we've done some stuff where they're all in the room together, but they can all see each other. We all make sure we got great headphone mixes. Everybody's playing at the same time.
Yeah.
And that creates, it's all about vibe. And the other thing, people get caught up on the sound. And it's kind of funny is being a producer, engineer, mixer, yeah, I can get obsessive about the sound, but it's kind of funny. There's a certain point where I don't really care, because to me it's more about vibe. Somebody asked me recently about using vocal mics on singers, like, oh, do you use this mic or do that mic, use that mic or whatever. Here's the thing I do when I'm working with singers. I'll set up 4 microphones in front of them if I've not worked with them before, and I have them sing into each one. I'll have them sing like a verse and a chorus, right? And I can hear the difference between the mics. I might think one is better, but guess which one I choose? I pick the one that the singer likes. I say, which mic do you like the best? And they'll say, I like this one here. And I pick that. You know why? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't freaking matter. Give me $100 mic. If they do a great performance, that's all that matters. For some reason, they either like the way that mic sounds in their headphones, or they just like it because it's bigger, or it's silver, or it's black. And if that's what it takes, I'll just say, you know what, you're right. I like that mic the best too. But the rest of the way, let them sing it, because if I get a great performance, it's all that
And
matters.
that's what it's about. In the end, what is the listener hear? Now, I think that digital listeners are being trained to hear differently. I think, and to conceive, they consume content. Could you
Yeah.
imagine us, Matt, let's get back 35 years, 40 years, you and I were hanging out, light up a joint. Could you imagine saying, hey, let's consume Dark Side of the Moon? You know, you say to your girlfriend, oh, I've got to flip the record so we can consume side B.
Well, it's weird. Like, technically speaking, I'm considered a content creator. And I
Yeah.
say it to people, but it's just one of those things that I'm like, God, is that what I'm doing here? I thought I was creating art. I thought I was trying to be unique. But oh, I guess I'm a content creator. To me, it kind of devalues what we're doing. Oh, it's just something to, fill up the space there. It God, that's a whole other. I feel like that's a whole. Somebody could probably write a book about that stuff. But I do think it's. I don't know. I don't know if people are necessarily being trained, overtly or whatever. But basically, yeah, we're getting conditioned.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I
Somebody. I
mean.
was
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Jimmy B, who's in one of my clients, and we're in a group called the Tokyo Teens, and he said pop music is like Pop Tarts.
Yeah.
It's kind of stale. It's all right. It's not great tasting, but you get used to it. If you improve the taste and put a great tasting flavor in them, people wouldn't like them because it's not what they're used to.
Mhm.
Everybody's used to the Pop Tarts. You buy them, you eat them, and it kind of does the job. But if you actually improved it too much, it wouldn't do well because they're all conditioned to eating crappy Pop Tarts. So that was his analogy, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
But if you're a baker, how much fun are you going to have baking the same Pop Tarts every day? You want a
None.
little experiment. You want it to be a little bit different every time. Everything is its own story. It's got its own atmosphere.
My main message to people with my videos and my live streams is about being unique. The video that you're referencing about why analog is better than digital really came down to the workflow. People thought I was talking about the sound, and I do talk about the sound, but it's really about how do you get the workflow back? And one of the main things I talk about is that it had to do with rewinding tape. So when you were working on analog, and let's say you did a take, and it's like, okay, let's go back and do another take on the vocal. Uh, the tape takes a little while to rewind back, right? So that gives the singer enough time to kind of like take a sip of water, take a breath, just catch their breath. But in digital, if you want to go do another take, it's literally 2 seconds. You want to do another take, boom, make another playlist, da 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 da, boom, and you're right there. And there's no chance to breathe and reflect and think about it. The other thing is, if you were working on a session and you were going to switch songs, you would have to change the reel every once in a while. You got to stop and clean the heads. You got to take the reel off, clean the heads, put the reel on. That's enough time for somebody to, I don't know, reflect, walk outside, take a little bit of break. In digital, it's almost just like we're all on this assembly line, and it's just boom, 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 boom. No time to stop and think about, what am I doing? Because sometimes when you stop and think about what you're doing, you'll realize, I think I've gotten off track a little bit, or maybe there's another direction we can go. But if you don't stop to think about it and reflect, then you can lose your direction often. And I found that it took me a long time to realize that, because I was one of the first to start recording and mixing in digital. Like, literally, I was doing this before most people. And it's funny when people say, oh, yeah, you're this anti-digital guy. I'm like, no, I'm not. I literally was one of the first people to mix Billboard charting singles, totally record and mix Billboard charting singles in the computer. But I've always tried to retain the workflow and the idea of, like, let's not be robots. We can take these workflows and the way of thinking from analog and apply them to digital. We don't have to just be these machines that are pumping out, I did 20 songs in one day. I hear people say that all the time. Like, well, guess what? They mostly sucked.
20 songs in one day.
Oh, yeah. Well, when they mean songs, they mean tracks. So they get on Splice, they download a loop, they get something, and most of this stuff's pre-made. It's like they're just piecing stuff together. And some of that stuff's cool. I mean, it sounds cool and it's catchy and all that, but It's not unique, and there's no there's no real artistry put into that. The artistry is like somebody who's really good at putting puzzles together. Basically, that's what it is. And I get it. They are able to make 20 tracks and get it out to people, and then somebody picks one and then get it on an album and all that. But it's not the creative process that we're used to. Nobody's really delving into the depths of my soul and why am I writing this song and what's it about. It's not like that anymore. It's more like, oh, it's this assembly line. I gotta churn out 20 cars in an hour on an assembly line.
It's process versus product.
Exactly.
Digital seems to be very product oriented.
Yes. Yes.
And look, it facilitates it. It's wonderful that we don't have to use videotape or film to do this. And we're working from, where are you?
I'm near Atlanta, Georgia.
Right. So we can, this is amazing that we can do this. This was satellite feeds it still is satellite feeds. I still get notices from the governor how to sign into the satellite feed. It's like, well, I don't know how to do that. But still, this would have been like NASA stuff not that long ago, right? So
yeah.
Here we are, just, ordinary guys just doing this. So, but I'm an analog man. I'm a typographical man, as McLuhan would say. I'm Gutenberg man, as McLuhan said, and I know that I'm Gutenberg man, and I find that the digital mentality to be quite irritating and repelling, because of this emphasis on product, but also, you were talking about, and I was mentioning, Emmylou Harris and Bob Dylan and Scarlett Rivera passing around a bottle of wine in the studio. I think that musical art is about people responding to each other and listening to one another. There's alchemy in music, and especially alchemy in live music.
Yeah.
And I think this gets lost when you have 90 tracks to work from. I mean, the Beatles recorded Abbey Road on a 4-track, if I'm not mistaken, right? That was a 4-track.
Yeah, I think
right?
some of that was 8-track, but there's a book called The Beatles Recording Sessions, and it documents every session that they ever did, from the time they walked in the door to the time they walked out, who was the engineer, what they worked on, how many takes they did. There's a couple stories in it, but it's mostly this documentation of everything that they recorded. And the number one thing that got to me about that is how many takes they would do on songs. They would go in and they would do 40 or 50 takes of a song. And it would be like, oh, take 1 through 11 was in this key. Then they changed the key and they tried it in this key. Then they sped it up. Then they slowed it down. And then they kind of changed some sounds, and they would do this and do this and do this and work on this, working out the performance, because it's about performance. Yes, it's about the sound and there's other things, but are they getting the right performance and getting the songwriting right? And it's also just about the work of doing it till you get it right. It was like, not, oh, we're going to do, I'll give you a great example. I record bands, and in the old days, a band would come in and you would set everybody up and they would play together because that's what they're used to doing. But younger bands, they'll come in and they'll think, oh, we're going to set the drummer up and he's going to play, 8 bars of the verse. And then I'm going to cut it and paste it. Then you do the chorus. And then the bass player is going to come in. And what always blows them away is like, no, you guys are going to set up and play together. Huh? Well, isn't that what you do on your gigs? Well, yeah, and the weird thing is they're not, they do that because they don't know any better. Nobody's ever been negative about it after they get into it. They're like, oh, wait a sec, this is oh, is it all right to do this? Oh, yes, it's all right. And luckily I have enough mics and rooms that I can do that. But it's weird how younger people, here's another thing. When I made the video and I was talking about, digital, the workflow and all that. Well, actually, it was a video about why music sounds the same. A very common thing nowadays is that when somebody sings the chorus, they sing it one time, and or they'll sing it till they and they'll piece it all together, right? Oh, I'll do it 50 times or 10 times. We piece that one chorus, and then they cut and paste it into all the choruses, right? So every chorus is exactly the same vocal performance. When I record people, I'm like, we're starting in the beginning, we're going all the way through. And then, yeah, it's like, oh, I think you could do the third chorus again. I'll punch them in, and I don't mind punching on single words, but we're not going to cut and paste the chorus unless they're absolutely terrible singers. But if anybody's a half decent singer, all the choruses are going to be unique. Same with a band. There's no reason we should be cutting and pasting the drums and all the guitar parts into every chorus. The choruses should breathe and grow, but that's another reason why music's kind of stale. And people get into this mindset. But when they come work with me, they're like, oh, wow. And when I put out that video talking about you don't have to cut and paste the vocals, it was amazing the amount of comments I got from people in that video saying, oh, wow, I'm going to go back and re-record my vocals now. I didn't know you could. I just thought that's how it was done. And it was cool. It was like younger people going, oh, I can be unique. Oh, I can do a performance, because everything they've seen has taught them cut and paste, blah, blah, blah. It's like, putting this block in this block hole or whatever, it's just this mold. People don't realize it's all right to be unique, and it's all right to have a flow. Things can sound different in different parts of the song. It's all right. It's good.
Yeah. Well, isn't that what? Look, I realize talking to a printing press guy here, but that repetition. My guitar teacher said the human ear wants to hear similarity, some repetition, and then it wants to hear variance, and the ear is naturally listening for both the repetition and the variance.
Yeah.
And if you're deep listening, which I'm thinking is kind of going away, you will really hear that. You'll really hear the distinctions as the song progresses, and how the harmony vocals are done differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for example. And I think that is really a source of the beauty. By the way, you're not saying cut and paste. You really mean copy and paste. Kind of like spell check.
Copy and paste. Sorry, cut and paste. Well,
I know what you meant,
but
copy and paste. Now, this brings me to quantize.
Yeah.
Quantize. Now, I happen to pick up two different Dark Side of the Moon first hear reaction videos. Do you love these things? Mm-hmm. Where there's like a young person and they put on an album they've never heard before, and they start all the cameras and they click play, and you're going to get to experience them experiencing. This is like PewDiePie, probably slightly less profitable. One young producer who he said he was a producer for 10 years and he had never heard a single note of Pink Floyd. Like, okay.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that.
So he puts on Dark Side of the Moon, and he has to keep stopping it because there's so much that is so different from what he's doing. And he's like, whoa, the drums aren't quantized. Now, for the neophyte to this, quantize is when you've got your drum track, you highlight the whole thing, and then some AI script, broop, straightens it all out and irons it out and makes it perfect.
Yeah, well, actually, that's been around since before AI, as far as even live drums. I could take there's this thing in Pro Tools called Beat Detective. Pro Tools is what the main DAW I use for bands. And it's not using AI, it's just looking at the waveforms, and it just lines up all the drums and puts them on beat.
Yep, got it. I'm generous with my use of the term AI. I think a Texas Instruments calculator is AI. But anyway,
yeah.
But I know what you mean. It's a digital tool that sorts it out. Rob Fraboni once said to me, you take a metronome to some of those old Rolling Stone songs, they will not stand up to a metronome, but you love them.
Oh yeah, listen.
Stand up to your ear beautifully, but not a metronome.
There's a song, AC/DC, I think it's Back in Black, and there's this one point in the song, bump, da-da-dunt, da-da-dunt, and then they go in da-da-da-da-da-da, bump. It drops down like 4 or 5 BPMs, beats per minute, in a matter of a couple bars. But the weird thing is, you don't notice unless you're really paying attention, because they just had a vibe. Yeah. Slowing down sometimes before a big explosive part can be very powerful. If you watch a conductor with an orchestra and they're building up to a big explosive section in this orchestral piece, they'll often slightly slow down and then hit that section. And that's the thing about music. So when people are, and we're not talking about electronic music with drum machines, but even bands, like playing in bands, a very common thing is for people to use something called a click track, where the drummer is listening to a click, right?
Yep.
He's following the click. Sometimes the other members of the band are hearing the click, sometimes they're not. But here's the thing about using a click track. Two things. One is use the click track and they're not going to be able to play exactly with the click, because they're usually, the way it works is the drummer, he gets slightly ahead of the click, so he slows down slightly. Then he's there for a few beats. Then he ends up, he'll overshoot slightly. Then he's like behind the click, and then he's ahead. And I remember one time a studio musician saying after a take, I was like, "How did you feel about playing with the click?" And he said, "We've got that thing surrounded."
Ah.
Because they're slightly ahead, slightly behind, slightly ahead. And then you take the software and you line it up, right? And then it's just like, what's the point? But here's the other thing.
Yep.
When somebody's recording with a click track, they're following something that the audience never hears.
Yep.
So they're following this click. So when you listen to music like that, it's like you're listening to music and there's this ghost in the music that you can't hear, but it's there dictating stuff. The band is following the click, which is the ghost. The audience never hears that click. And it just kind of takes this soul away. And unless I absolutely have to, I don't use click tracks with bands. If the band's got a good vibe and they got a lot of good feel, then I will just let them run. Sometimes you maybe got to nudge a little something like, okay, that was a really bad section. That one snare hit's way off. I might move a snare hit, but at least the band has got their natural feel. If it's a band that plays out live together, and they do this naturally all the time.
Yep.
Because clicks, to me, just lock everybody into one spot, and then it's just, what's the point?
Yep. It helps if there's a strong time center in the band. If they know it's usually going to be the bass or the drums.
Yeah.
So that's a very important person in the band. In the Grateful Dead with two drummers, Phil was time center, the bass player was time center, which is impressive given that he was like all over the place, but he was still time center. But with the two drummers, you've got Mickey a little ahead of the beat, Billy a little bit behind the beat, right? So you needed somebody else to hold the center. But see, what they were doing was they were all listening to each other very, very carefully, and they didn't really like the recording studio very much.
Yeah.
They weren't very good at it. My favorite recordings of Jerry in the studio were just when he was screwing around with the guys. The whiskey in the jar on So Many Roads. I don't even think there's a complete take, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And they're joking around. But I'm a person who prefers to watch sound check than to watch a show.
Yeah.
Now,
and
to photograph sound check, I much prefer to photograph sound check. Go ahead. What?
I was going to say, on the subject of quantizing, the other reason why it's not such a great thing is about the bigness of sound. You'll often hear people say older records sound bigger. And the reason for me is not just, oh, it was analog or the boards or whatever. It has to do with time and tuning. So if you think about timing, and you just said it right there, when a band is playing together, one person is slightly ahead, one is slightly behind, and then somebody's kind of right on the beat. If you think about where the beats are, you've got like, okay, here's the beat, right? And then you've got somebody here and you've got somebody here. So the beat, where everybody's hitting on the downbeat, right? But it's really not like that. It's more like, right? It's like these flans because nobody's hitting. And it's quick enough that it doesn't sound messy, but it just sounds bigger because the focus of the beat, where the beat is bigger. But when you've got everybody quantized, every instrument is hitting right like this. So there's all this space in between that's not being taken up.
Yeah.
Think about that, all the space. But the same with tuning. Everything's in tune now. Everything's so in tune. So if you think about, here's a note right here in the middle, and here's, here's the harmony, here's the fifth, and here's the third. Every instrument's like, root, third, fifth. But in the old days, you couldn't really tune the organ exactly perfectly. A piano can never be, none of these acoustic instruments can be tuned perfectly. Also, they didn't have modern tuners like we did now. So they're tuning by ear. So if you listen to older records, everybody was slightly out, but it was almost like this effect. So instead of having like root, third, fifth, you had root, but it was wider because one guy's here in the middle, one guy's slightly sharp, one slightly flat. Same for the third, same for the fifth. So there's less space in between. So each note literally sounds bigger because nobody's totally in tune. It's just enough. That's why older records sound bigger. Yeah. Tuning and timing.
But the ear is an analog instrument, if you dare to even call it that. I mean, it's kind of the prototype of analog. It's a wholly organic thing. You just come out your mama with your hearing going on. You listen, your hearing was working when you were in the womb. Yeah. Hearing is the first sense to come on. You've been listening before you've been doing anything. Your ear is not looking for digital perfection. Your ear is looking for, I wouldn't know what even the word is, but it's that sense of space. I mean, because acoustic space is very undefined compared to visual space. It's like sounds in the forest. And where exactly can you point? Can you point to that sound out? You can think you can point to it, but it's all, the difference between analog recording and digital recording is that analog recording is entirely happening in acoustic space, but digital recording is happening with a representation on a visual screen. And the visual sense tends to dominate, especially in modern times, the other senses. And so it is there's an artifice involved in imposing visual order on acoustic space.
Yeah, hold on a sec. Took a sip of water too quickly.
This is terrible in a live environment.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I choked on. I was in the middle of a live thing the other day. I gagged on some water.
Well, it kind of comes back to air. You said it right there. Older records, except for maybe the bass guitar, which might have been plugged direct in DI, everything else had to be recorded. All the sound had to go through the air to a microphone.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's very little air on a record. Maybe the singer, so I worked on albums where the only thing that went through the air was the vocals because everything else is like in the computer. So, and sound is moving air particles, right? Yep. But all of this is like in there, and some of these sounds, and sometimes, maybe you're using you're using samples that were recorded with a microphone, but a lot of it isn't. It's just synthesized. It's just kind of created using, synthesis, using noise, and then they kind of can take noise and whatever. And to me, that's another thing. When sound doesn't go through the air, it changes something. And I think that's a huge thing.
Well, it's not natural.
Exactly.
It's not natural because it is so, that adds to the whole quantized feeling. In another one of these Dark Side of the Moon reaction videos, it was a young lady listening to Dark Side of the Moon for the first time, and she was repeatedly amazed that the music was making her feel things. Ooh. I felt that. Welcome to music. It's all about how you feel. It was so funny and was endearing also, right? But still, like, this is telling me something. And then if we contrast that with the music producer for 10 years who'd never heard a single note of Pink Floyd, saying his response was, "Wow. Those drums weren't quantized. They're responding to the same thing." Right? The producer's analyzing it mentally. The woman is feeling it emotionally. She's not trained in the studio, but it's the same thing. And I'm only talking about like the first 5 minutes, right? These are both responses in the first 5 minutes, and they're both having the same basic response. But we're, you know, the physical world is everything's slipping and sliding a little bit. It's not supposed to be precise, you know, gigahertz precision.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. People want, I guess people want things to be set and organized and predictable, but it's not really how things work.
But that's a digital effect. This is all conditioning of the digital environment. I mean, there's a lot. The world has a lot of problems right now that are being caused by overexposure to and complete takeover of the digital environment. Talking about, I heard a statistic last night that something like the amount of energy that's going to be needed to power AI is something like one third of all the households in the entire country. For what the holy fuck? Or that Bill Gates has to rev the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant to be able
Yeah.
to power one. He has to revive. Like the symbolism of that alone is like so beautiful. I can't even stand it.
There's a book by Neil Stevenson. Neil Stevenson is one of my favorite writers. He wrote Cryptonomicon and some other great books, but he's got one, oh God, I forgot the name of it. It was one of his latest books, but he talks about AI and how it becomes so powerful. I can't go, I don't want to get too much into the book, but it's about these virtual realities people go into, but it becomes so power hungry that they literally have to have satellites in space with solar arrays to, you know, generate the power, but the heat that they generate is so much that they have to be in space so that they don't melt. And when I read the book, I guess it was like 3 years ago, I thought, oh, that's a bit outlandish. But he's always ahead of his time because he's actually the guy that came up with the term avatar.
Oh, this is
His
Neil.
first book,
This
Snow
is
Crash.
Neil Stevenson.
Neil Stevenson, you should check him out. I think Snow Crash was his first book, and he actually coined the term avatar back before anybody knew what he was talking about. But I think he's right because AI is consuming so much power, and where it's I don't know. I don't know where the world is going with that whole thing. It's a little scary. I've got 3 kids who are all creatives and they're in their late teens, early 20s, wanting to move into creative careers. And they're doing it, but there's a bit of apprehension there. And also, I think it kind of holds them back a little bit because they're wondering if they're even going to be able to do anything.
Sure.
I feel like generative AI is basically evil and a crime because it's basically stealing other people's ideas. And I'll get people sometimes commenting on my videos and they'll say something like, I made a song with Suno or whatever. It's like, no, you didn't make crap.
Yeah.
You typed some stuff in. And it's like, I get why people want to use it, but it's literally theft. And beyond that, I don't know if it's long-term good for humanity as if we want to be what we used to be, which was living, breathing, feeling humans. But if we want to turn into robots, then maybe that's the best thing.
Well, exactly. And exactly. And I think what we're grousing around the point is that the artists are allowing themselves to be turned a bit robotic because quantizing is robotic. It is turning the sound into a more robotic sound like a beat machine would make.
Yeah.
And the responses of these 2 kids listening to Dark Side of the Moon, I think are very telling. And I think they were obviously expressing contrast to the music of current times, which doesn't have that.
Yeah.
I inherited a bunch of Madonna CDs. I was never much of a Madonna fan. This is going back about 15 years, and I thought, all right, well, okay. So I had like a little Nissan with a 5-disc changer in it. So I shoved all the discs in, and for the next couple of months, I drove around and I only listened to Madonna. I'm sorry, you could. I got people thinking, "Oh, you had to go through that," but no, I subjected myself to this experiment, and at the end of it, I thought I had one thought. Now, maybe you can guess. Now that you've heard a little bit of my ideas, I had one critique. Can you guess what it was?
I don't know. I'm kind of curious where this is going.
The critique was, this would be pretty good if she actually had a drummer.
Yeah. Yeah.
but all she had was these drum machines.
Well, think about the time that was popular.
It was, but there are plenty of acts that use a combination of live drums and drum machines.
Yeah.
But it was that it made the music sound kind of electrical in a way. I mean, and I don't mean like a feedback sense, but robotic. It made it sound robotic. There was so little human coming through, and you think the ultimate rhythm of the universe is your heartbeat, right? Well, that's not exactly that. That's changing a little bit every single time. So I think that to take the rhythm, the natural human rhythm out, is horrible. That's all I can really say. I mean, and when I see a band, if I can get close enough to them to talk to them after the show, it's pretty much always the bass player or the drummer whose ring I kiss, because they bring something in terms of the overall total atmosphere and feeling that you can't make without a human being. You just can't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. I was thinking about early disco records. It never occurred to me till later that most of those ones, like, back in the late 70s and early 80s, they were done with real drummers. Now it's funny, they sound like drum machines in a way, just because I think the early drum machines copied those sounds.
Yeah.
But it was actually just guys with great timing. They just had a great vibe. And I never really thought about it. Or like Earth, Wind, and Fire, which is one of my all-time favorite bands, and they got great dance songs and all that. But those aren't. That's just people vibing and jamming and all that. I don't. But I think it kind of comes down to, with younger musicians and producers, is that they just don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird when you said the guy didn't know who Pink Floyd was. I've actually run into that several times, where people didn't know who. God, there was one thing where they didn't even know who Van Halen was. And because we were doing this thing, we are talking about doing a guitar part, and it's like, oh, like Van Halen. They're like, who? Like, come on. They'd be like one of the biggest selling, whether you like them or not, you should have at least heard of them. But that's the other thing about the way music is nowadays. In the old days, even if you didn't like country music, you would somehow know who the most famous country star was. That we would just know because of the way we heard music and all that. We weren't all so in our different silos, but it's weird now how people are so disconnected from everybody else. I was actually having a conversation with a young producer recently, and I mentioned Chapel Roan and Doechii. So Chapel Roan is a female singer who does, I don't know how to describe her. I actually really like her a lot. I mean, it's pop music and all that, but I just kind of like her as a person. And she won something at the Grammys and made a really cool speech. And she wears this flamboyant clothing and all that. And then Doechii is a new rapper who I just think is very innovative. But the thing I like about her a lot too is that she talks about her creative process, and a lot of it has to do more of them as people. But I mentioned Chapel Roan to this young producer, and he had no idea who I was talking about. I was like, dude, she just won a Grammy. And this is a guy who's working on major label records. He's in the music business, working full time at this thing, and it's mostly rap and R&B, but still he wouldn't know a pop singer who just won a Grammy. And that's how we're all separated into these little different silos. And that's why I think you see a lot of younger creators, music creators, that are they don't know about this stuff because they just don't hear it. If they could hear it, I think they would be inspired and motivated to do something better, which is, again, one of my quests here. One of my goals here is to reach younger people. Of course, I look at my YouTube video statistics, and it's all older people, but I regularly get younger people coming into my videos and saying, wow, this is really cool. I never thought of doing it this way. And I just think people need to think. If people knew, they would make different types of records. They just literally don't know.
So now we're talking about listening and how the music reaches people. So one of the I don't know if you remember the thing of a radio station, But I remember the thing known as a radio station. And the funny thing about a radio station was, I know this is going to shock some people, but it was a number of different people, like in a city, listening to the same radio station. And then there was a DJ who was actually there talking, usually into a mic like that. Whereas now everyone's got an algorithm that feeds them more of the thing that it thinks that they like, which is completely well, it's very similar to the political silos that people get in. They get into this bubble. They're proven right by the other people who claim that they're right, and they can be completely off the wall.
Oh yeah.
You know, the Earth is flat or whatever, and it is just completely re-verified. And the same thing happens with all these little private algorithmic radio stations. It somewhat drives me crazy to watch people walking down the street with their earbuds in. I mean, it was only after nearly getting killed a couple of times living in London that I thought this is absolutely the stupidest thing in the world to not be able to hear what's going on
Yeah.
and the city around me. So there's that as well, that it's a cutoff point to be siloed in that, and then the robot is picking the songs you're supposed to like. Well, if you it where's there a crying chance of Pink Floyd going to slip in to that?
Yeah, exactly. The people aren't being challenged. I think the algorithm of just feeding you more of what you like is probably one of the worst things about social media. And it goes, like you said, beyond music, it goes to political things. People who don't actually know about things that are going on that other it's weird when I talk to people sometimes. I'm like, I don't want to get in a political discussion here, but it's kind of amazing how some people will have absolutely no idea. Like I had somebody recently, we were talking, he said, it was like a couple months ago, it was like, what was that whole January 6th thing?
What year? Yeah.
Yeah, talking about the whole attack on the Capitol. And it's like how some people think it was this and some people's that. And like, if you want to go look for it, and I'm the kind of guy, I dig in and I look at other sources, but most people don't. So they're being fed, so they're not seeing certain things going on in the world. But same with music, because the algorithm feeds them these things, and then they go down these little rabbit holes and they become cut off from everybody else. But how would they know? You know, to me, that is, it should have something thrown in there once in a while that just does something unpredictable. That makes you go, oh, what's that? You know, I think that'd be a good thing. I don't know if I don't know if it's going to make them much more money doing that. I know why they do it, but it's also kind of like, to me, that sort of thing is like just giving a junkie, a drug addict, more of the same drug. To me, I think it's a terrible thing. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want. People getting what they want all the time, exactly what they want, isn't always necessarily the best thing. Sometimes you need to be uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable once in a while and being thrown out of your element and where you don't know what's going on can be one of the best things. The funny thing for me is I'm a guitar player and a mandolin player. Not great on any of them, but good enough to write songs and play in a band and stuff like that. And I ended up, for years, I was playing like singer-songwriter stuff and my weird little songs about angels and spirits and, you know, whatever. And it's a long story how it happened, but I ended up working on a lot of rap records, right? And it was mostly because of some weird things that happened in my life, these chance meetings. But I ended up meeting these rappers, and Bone Crusher, who is a famous rapper, and I ended up becoming friends with him. And it has nothing to do with my history. Like, he didn't go camping. He's not camping. He's not out in a canoe and doing the sort of things I do. But I just hit it off with these guys. So I just like thought, hey, let's start working on some records, just because I thought they were fun to hang out with and some of the coolest guys I ever met in my life. But there were so many times over the first few years of working on that I had absolutely no idea what was going on in the studio, because they've got their own way of talking. All of those guys can speak perfect English, by the way. I'll let you know. They can speak better English than me, but they talk the way they talk from Southwest Atlanta or whatever. And there would be jokes I wouldn't understand. There's also this thing I noticed with the rapper guys, that when they're listening to music, unlike white people, when you listen to music and you bop your head goes forward on the downbeat. But with those guys, their head goes back on the downbeat. And there was all these weird little things like that. And me being a musician and having some training, I was a little snobbish about it, like, oh, these guys don't know music. But there are so many things over the years I realized, oh my God, they're actually being innovative because they're coming from this different direction, or they kind of don't know about music. And this was back before we were copying and pasting hooks and all that. We would actually do for performances. It was more of an art. But the point being, it threw me out of my comfort zone and made me completely look at everything I was doing differently. Even though I don't necessarily love rap music, it's not like although some of it I do like, but it was not something like, oh man, I'm going to listen to it all the time. To me, it was more about an experience and the people, and I just loved them. And then they all had hit records. I was like, well, I guess I'll ride this train for a while. That was kind of fun. But it profoundly affected the way I thought about everything in my freaking life. It changed the way I thought about America, because I thought I knew Americans. I thought I knew black Americans because I lived on Army bases, and I had black friends. It's not the same as really getting to know some guys from the hood, some real dudes from the hood, and then them getting to know you enough to trust you to really talk about stuff. And it changed everything. But I was able to take those experiences and the things I learned and apply it to bluegrass records and country records. And I could go into a whole thing about that, but it was getting out of my perspective and my comfort zone and hearing things that like musically made absolutely no sense. There were things they would do that I thought, that's just wrong musically. That's not even in the key. And then later you go, oh, they don't know it's not in the key, but they just like it because of the sound. And then you realize, oh, there's this cool tension there. I mean, this is, I can't even explain. And the other thing about working on rap music for me was like, there'd be so many times I'd hear a rapper and I'd think, this guy's terrible. He's so offbeat. He's just terribly offbeat. But everybody in the room would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. I'm like, I don't get it. And then over the years, I realized they're focusing on the emotion of what he's saying. Now, I'm not talking about rap music nowadays. I'm talking about late 90s, early 2000s. And it was like, wow, I don't have to listen in terms of whether it's this way or these, according to these music theory rules. Not that I'm any expert on music theory, but it kind of got me out of that. I realized like, we don't have to follow those rules. We can just do this stuff over here. And I found it very innovative. So the point being, I just don't think people are challenged enough and put in uncomfortable situations. One of the things I tell people that are working on music, and I know we're getting a little off the subject about digital here, but it kind of ties into the whole algorithmic thing, is that if you really want to be a great artist, stop listening to your favorite music. Do it for 3 months, 4 months. Don't listen to any of your favorite music. Only listen to stuff that's completely different from what you do. Even if you don't like it, just do it every day. Listen to completely different music. You can go back to your favorite music after a while. It ain't going to hurt you. It ain't going to hurt you. But whether you realize it or not, you're going to learn a lot of stuff. You're going to pick up things you don't even know you're picking up. And you're going to take that back to your own music. And that's going to help you create a more unique sound that is your own sound.
Yeah, you're talking about growth and developing creative tastes and being challenged. I mean, I think that's a very important part of art is to challenge us.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be, and especially if you're an artist, right? As an artist, I think it's important to do things that you're not familiar with, and things that that dare you to transgress your own boundaries.
And that kind of comes back to the whole conversation about analog versus digital. Digital makes things easier with creating music, which is good in a lot of ways, but because it's easier, you're not challenged. But if you think about these older records, what did they have in the studio? They had a tape machine, they had an organ, a guitar, they might have had an early synthesizer, which couldn't do a lot. They might have had a flanger pedal, a chorus pedal, a distortion box, a tape echo. And you were like, okay, God, how can we take these sounds and make them sound different? How can we, so they would have to jump through hoops. There was a challenge there. And the challenge just to make a record was harder. It was just harder to make a record in a lot of ways because you just had to be a better player. But the challenge made you better. Because there's not as much of a challenge nowadays with digital because it's easier, people don't grow. Well, no challenge, let's grow
as much. No, you need that. You need that stretch. I mean, people forget that that distortion was originally created by turning the gain all the way up and the volume. You were doing it on the amp. You were actually doing this on the amp. It was kind of breaking the amp in a way, like using it a way you're not supposed to use it. But that sound, and then also the five-way switch on the Stratocaster. That was originally a three-way switch, if I understand history correctly, and some
Oh,
of
I
the
didn't know
players
that.
figured out that you could set the switch in the middle, and then they started wiring.
It's out of phase. Yeah.
They started wiring the. Well, is it still out of phase when you set it to
I
the?
think it does do some phasing, which is why the tone is weird. Oh, that's another thing. Boy, people get on me about phasing, which is aligning microphones and sound so all the sounds, you're not technically supposed to be out of phase, but I do that stuff intentionally all the time. That's another reason why it's good to use microphones to intentionally do something the wrong way.
Yeah.
I love doing things the wrong way. Love doing it because that sometimes just sounds cooler, you know? But yeah, that's that what you're talking about there on a Stratocaster guitar. I think technically when they're in those in between things, there's a bit of phasing going out, which is canceling out some frequencies why it just sounds cool like that. We don't need all the
And
frequencies.
why?
We just need the best ones.
And also why you cut the hum out.
Yeah.
So, but all of this, I mean, people forget how recently something like the electric guitar even came into being. It was not that long ago, talking 49, I believe, for the Telecaster, right? And then maybe the next year or two later for the Stratocaster, they were improvising these things before that. They were improvising pickups, and it took a lot of work to get it right. It was. Do I still have the? No, I used to have the patent for the
Oh,
Les Paul
wow.
hanging on the wall. You know, a little copy of the patent diagram for the electric guitar.
Oh, cool.
So this was all done experimentally. It was experimentally, and it's electricity. What the hell is that stuff anyway, right? So, but with digital, with almost totally taming electricity, it loses its wildness, its
Yes, exactly.
unpredictability, its plasma-like quality to essentially and quantize it, to fit it into little teeny boxes and containers.
Yeah,
Right on the right on
my
the
whole
beat.
thing is like, how can I? Like I said, I like to do things the wrong way, and I love distortion. And to me, it's more about I am almost like the guy who's like messing things up to to be unique. How can I not be the same as other people? That's just a big quest of mine. And because people are recording less with microphones, it's actually in a strange way with all these tools, all these thousands of plugins and all that, and all the choices, it's strangely enough harder to be unique. You got to work a little bit harder.
Because the uniqueness is coming from the feeling, that your personal expression. But the
Yeah.
less people feel that they have to personally express, the less they're going to want to personally express it. And one of the things digital does is it removes that inner private self and just puts everything out into the outer world, and it totally involves you, where you have, a lot of all art is created because people are going through something they have to express.
Oh,
They're
absolutely.
changing, they're stretching, they're in pain, they're experiencing difficulty, they're metaphysically challenged by something. You can't have a love song without love. I don't know how a computer is going to write a love song,
They've got them doing it now.
but I mean, is it convincing?
I don't know. My whole thing with AI is that we can't stop it. I think what's probably going to happen is almost going to be like a different genre. Like all of a sudden, there's this other thing, like the way rock popped up or rap popped up, and it's just at first people are going to be like, I just think AI is going to be this whole other thing over here. It's going to be involved in some of the other genres for sure, but it's going to be this thing over here, and there'll be a place for it. It's going to throw a lot of people out of work, but there's still going to be a place for live music. I do think people and real music created by humans. I feel like people crave that, and I think there will be a place for it. I absolutely believe that because people want connection to humans.
Yes, and I sincerely hope there's enough people who want to maintain that connection to humans, that they will want to preserve their humanity. But the problem with technology is it really changes society in major ways. It disorients us on our physical orientation, on like digital takes us out of body orientation and into this bizarre spatial, like it's another space. Your body exists on the astral plane.
Yeah.
We're not men in digital space. We are pixel phantoms, devoid of bodies, devoid of hormones, and that has an effect when we come back to the physical plane. And
Well,
some
that's
people,
why I think the live scene is doing pretty good. I do work with a lot of bands that tour, and they're doing good. It actually started taking off a few years ago. There was a long time where it just didn't seem like it was that big of a deal, but there's a lot of bands out there hustling. Of course, gas prices kind of hold them back some, but man, it's kind of crazy if you're tapped into like the jam grass scene, or like these, like Billy Strings and the Dusters, and even the weird thing's crazy to me that even rap artists, even ones I don't like, but they're out doing gigs. Like back when I got into rap music, concerts weren't a big deal. That's not where the money was at, but also it wasn't something they considered. But now it is, because people want to see them. People want to go out and have these experiences with other people. The live concert scene is actually doing well right now, and I think it's a people's reaction to needing to connect. And this is true across all genres.
yeah, well, live is analog, right? It's unpredictable. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. The audience is there. The audience is an instrument in the environment, right? McLuhan said why people go to these big concerts is for the audience. They want to feel the other people around them. It's like a darshan ceremony, right? With it is the ritual ceremony of it, which is by definition unpredictable.
Yeah. There are
Something,
people, I went out and saw Tears for Fears a couple years ago. It was actually one of my kids is into them, which is, I mean, I love Tears for Fears, but it was one of my kids who got into it. And I don't even know how he got into them, because it's not like I play the stuff at home. But so he wanted to go. So we went. And then I had a friend of mine bring me along to a Seal concert about a year or so ago. What was interesting was looking at the audience. One of my favorite things to do at a show is to turn around and look at the audience.
yes.
And it was crazy how many young people were there, especially the Seal concert. It was actually kind of an emotional experience where he said, "Hey, turn up the lights, turn up the lights." And they brought up the lights, and they said, "I want everybody to turn around and look at each other." And I turned around, and it was like, oh my God, there's all different ages, all different races, people from obviously different type, backgrounds and all that. And it was like, wow, you never would have seen that back in the day. You go to a concert, everybody kind of looks the same, right? But that was the same thing at the Tears for Fears one. And then I went, strangely enough, it was an EDM show. It was like Pretty Lights or something like that. And and I'm not even into that music, but it was because of a connection I had with a management agency, and they got me some tickets. I said, yeah, I'll go to a Pretty Lights show. It was bonkers. There were like, here's a group of people. They look like upper middle class white people from Alpharetta, Georgia. And right next to them are a bunch of bikers, like Harley guys. And they're all just jamming. And then over here are hippies and then college kids. And I'm like, what is going on? So I do think that there's this like movement towards people being into live music, and it's out there. I mean, it is out there. And I don't think we need to give up hope on the thing. It's something that we got to push against with AI and the technology on there. But I do think, I guess I'm as negative as I can be sometimes. There's a bit of an optimist in me, and I believe that humans will eventually circle around back to wanting to be humans again, and wanting to interact and have real experiences and do real artistic things that are really made by humans. I do believe that. I do think we're going to have to go through this AI thing for a while, but I have faith in humans.
I am happy to hear you say that. Perfect note to end on, Billy.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed this. This is awesome.
Good. So I would love to have you back on the program. I will send you some of my articles about how I'm, responding to the digital situation, which I treat it as a spiritual situation,
Yeah,
not a technological one. It is definitely the most important factor in the spiritual condition of humanity right now, and
absolutely.
it's always the artists who see us through.
Well, I look forward to that. You just let me know, and I'd be happy to be on another episode.
Wonderful. Billy, again, thanks for joining me on Planet Waves FM and Planet Waves TV. Been speaking with Billy Hume, music producer from the Atlanta area.
Thank you.